Hello everyone, I'm Excelum, and welcome to Advanced Wars Academy, where I discuss strategies that will improve your Advanced Wars PvP. Today, I'll be talking about a concept I like to call Zones of Control. The core concept at play is that you are more powerful when the fight is taking place closer to your factories, and weaker when you're fighting farther away. This is a manifestation of defender's advantage that many strategy games employ, making it easier to defend than to attack. I define a player's zone of control as a region of the map where they can deploy reinforcements more quickly than their opponent. In the vast majority of cases, this emanates from their factories and other unit-producing structures. There is generally an overlapping region in the center where reinforcement speed is roughly equal for both players, which I call the contested zone. If you fight in your own zone of control, you'll benefit from your reinforcements arriving sooner and your opponents arriving later, giving you a localized numerical advantage that can tip the balance of the fight in your favor. Conversely, if you fight in your opponent's zone of control, you will have fewer units in the area than your opponent and have a disadvantage. The advantage of fighting in your zone of control is so severe that it is very common for inexperienced players to win a small fight, overextend too far into enemy territory, and then lose their entire army. Suppose that you and your opponent are making 2 tanks per turn. If you push into your opponent's zone of control, your reinforcing tanks will take 1 more turn to arrive, and your opponents will arrive 1 turn faster. This manifests as an effective 4 tank advantage in the actual combat area, which can easily swing the results of a battle. Even if you have scored a small victory and have 1 or 2 more tanks than your opponent, the fight will not be in your favor. If you are fighting in what I call the contested zone, you and your opponent's reinforcements should be arriving at roughly the same time, making the fight pretty even. This is generally where most fights happen if both players know what they're doing. So, how do you calculate the area of the zone of control? Since most high-level play centers around the tank anti-air battlecopter dynamic, I base it around the movement range of a tank. A player's first zone of control is the strongest one, and it is the 1-turn tank movement range from their factories, meaning that they can make a tank and then attack in that range the next turn. In this zone, reactive play is very strong, and you must be careful of direct unit counters being made, such as anti-airs versus battlecopters, especially in Fog of War, where you cannot normally see enemy unit production. A player's second zone of control is the 2-turn tank movement range, and in some smaller maps, the contested zone is the overlap between each player's second zone of control. In larger maps, it may take 3 or 4 turns of tank movement to reach the other player, but I will not delve deeper into that for simplicity's sake. So now that I've talked about it in a more abstract sense, let's do a more practical example on an actual map. This is Stolen Seconds, a map in the Fog of War map pool of Advanced Wars by Web's competitive ladder system, Global League. Each player has 3 factories, 1 airport, and 1 easily accessible comm tower for a plus 10% damage bonus. This map is quite small, and each player's 2-turn tank movement range for their factories overlap in the center. Now let's draw the zones of control on the map. Here's the first zone of control for the red player, emanating from his 3 factories. From this, we can also extrapolate a rough second zone of control, and we can do this to the green player as well. There we go. So, while this looks like an absolute mess, and it is, we can see which areas of the map are the most contested and where you ought to be if you want an even fight. The overlapping regions in the center are the places where both players are roughly even, and going beyond this point exposes you to additional hits that you would normally not take. Just make sure not to seep blood in the water and attack too far into your opponent's first zone of control, marked by the blue area. If you're adjacent to that border, then you can be attacked by an opponent tank, fresh out of the factory. Generally, if you are not actively fighting, you should hover your units just outside of your opponent's zones of control, so you can threaten the maximum area while your opponent cannot reach you with the reinforcements. Though of course the ranges of your opponent's other more active units is probably more important. So now that I have talked about the general guidelines, let's talk some exceptions. Attacking into your opponent's side of the map is favorable if 1. You already have a sizable material advantage. For example, if you already have like 6 more tanks than your opponent, then you can simply overcome the reinforcement advantage by having more stuff. This also extends to an income advantage. If your opponent cannot make as many tanks as you, then the reinforcements are obviously weaker and their defender's advantage is lessened. 2. Your opponent is out of position. If you know your opponent's forces are on the other side of the map, you can push into less defended areas more safely, because your opponent simply does not have as much stuff in the local area. 3. You can shield your units via a choke point, body blocking, or walling. So if you can restrict your opponent's offensive capabilities by protecting your more valuable units with terrain, infantry, or each other, then you can overcome numerical disadvantages. This is a more advanced tactic that I won't be able to get to into more detail right now. It would have to be its own video. 4. Your CO power allows you to move faster or make the enemy move slower. Some CO powers, like that of Jake and Max, will allow you to move farther, expanding your threat range. This can allow you to temporarily overcome the reinforced distance, in addition to having the firepower bonuses. Olaf's and Drake's CO powers can also slow the enemy down to make the reinforcements not make it in time. However, this is at most a temporary measure, and you should of course take future turns into account. Most of the time, it is not enough to be worth it. 5. You have scouting information of the base. If you know that specific units are being made out of that base, then you can play around the information. For instance, light tanks are no threat to medium tanks, so pushing a medium tank into your opponent's side of the map can be safe if you know there are no counters coming out of that factory. The same can be done for flying units if you know there are no anti-airs in the vicinity. While this is highly map dependent, you'll know it when you see it. 6. The unit composition is strange. This entire video is based on the assumption that your opponent is in fact making the correct units to beat you. However, if your opponent is doing something silly like spamming mechs, then their zone of control is much smaller as mechs have a much lesser movement range. And 7. There is some objective you want to capture, such as the HQ or a comm tower. In these cases, the situation gets highly map dependent, and properly capturing an HQ while not having a complete military advantage is a somewhat more advanced tactic. But if there is some larger goal instead of just chasing down units to fight, then in some cases it is worth it. And some caveats. This is more of a generalization, as the specific map components are always more important. The zones of control from each individual factory is separate, so the number of reinforcing tanks that can attack is highly variable. I'm not even getting into fighting on multiple fronts, maps with a strong side and weak side dynamic, mixed base maps where factories are intertwined with one another, maps with multiple airports, maps where lander and black bolt transportation are common, and anything that's more complicated. This information is mainly for the simpler, open maps that comprise the majority of Advanced Wars by Web's competitive ladder. But if there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's don't fight in range of your enemy's factories. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Excelblum. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next Advanced Wars Academy. Bye.